The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the sprawling swamps of Fouke, Arkansas. The dense foliage and twisted trees created a labyrinth of shadows, their gnarled branches stretching out like skeletal hands. The air was thick with humidity, and the smell of decaying vegetation filled the night. Somewhere deep in the heart of this murky wilderness, an ancient beast wandered, far from its familiar mountain home. Bigfoot, the elusive giant of the Pacific Northwest, had traveled far, driven by an inexplicable force that led him deep into the southern swamps. He had crossed rivers, scaled mountains, and traversed miles of dense forest, following an instinctual pull that he neither understood nor could resist. Now, in the heart of the Fouke swamps, he found himself disoriented and lost, the familiar terrain of his home replaced by a world of murky water, cypress trees, and thick, sticky mud. Bigfoot paused at the edge of a stagnant pool, his massive frame looming in the shadows. His dark fur, usually a perfect camouflage in the pine forests, now made him stand out against the lighter, swampy background. His deep-set eyes scanned the area, searching for a landmark or any sign that might help him find his way back. But the swamp was a place of mystery and danger, its landscape ever-changing, and it offered no clear path to safety. As Bigfoot moved through the swamp, he became increasingly aware that he was not alone. The swamp was alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures, frogs croaked, insects buzzed, and unseen animals rustled in the underbrush. But there was something else, a presence that he could feel more than see, lurking just beyond the edge of his vision. He paused, listening intently. The air was still, the only sound the slow drip of water from the trees above. But then, from somewhere deep within the swamp, he heard a low, rumbling growl. It was a sound that sent a chill down his spine, primal and threatening. Bigfoot knew that this was no ordinary animal, it was something much more dangerous. The Fouke monster, also known as the Boggy Creek monster, was a creature of legend in these parts. For decades, locals had whispered stories of a massive, ape-like creature that roamed the swamps at night, terrorizing anyone who crossed its path. Descriptions varied, but all agreed on one thing: the Fouke monster was a beast to be feared, a savage predator with an unquenchable thirst for blood. Bigfoot had heard of such creatures in his travels, but he had never encountered one. Now, as the growl echoed through the swamp, he knew that he was about to face one of the most formidable opponents of his life. The Fouke monster stepped out of the shadows, its massive form silhouetted against the moonlit water. It was similar in size to Bigfoot, but there were differences that set it apart. Its fur was darker, almost black, and matted with mud and swamp debris. Its eyes glowed a fiery red in the darkness, and its long arms ended in claws that gleamed in the pale light. The Fouke monster's mouth was filled with sharp, yellowed teeth, bared in a snarl as it advanced toward Bigfoot. The two creatures stood facing each other, the tension between them palpable. They were both giants in their own right, powerful and ancient beings that had roamed the earth long before humans had come to dominate the land. But now, in the depths of the Fouke swamps, there was only room for one apex predator. With a roar that shook the trees, the Fouke monster charged, its claws extended, ready to tear into Bigfoot's flesh. Bigfoot met the charge head-on, his own roar echoing through the swamp as he prepared for the fight of his life. The two titans clashed in a fury of fur, teeth, and claws. The force of their impact sent shockwaves through the swamp, disturbing the still water and sending ripples across the surface. Bigfoot swung a massive fist at the Fouke monster, landing a blow that would have felled a lesser creature, but the Fouke monster barely flinched. It retaliated with a swipe of its claws, slashing across Bigfoot's chest and drawing dark blood. Bigfoot staggered back, the pain flaring through his body, but he quickly recovered, his eyes narrowing in determination. He was a survivor, a creature that had lived for centuries in the harsh wilderness of the Pacific Northwest, and he was not about to be defeated by this swamp-dwelling monster. He lunged at the Fouke monster, his powerful arms wrapping around its torso as he attempted to wrestle it to the ground. The two giants grappled, their roars filling the night as they struggled for dominance. They crashed through the underbrush, trampling everything in their path as they fought with a ferocity born of desperation. The Fouke monster fought back with savage intensity, using its claws and teeth to tear at Bigfoot's flesh. But Bigfoot was not without his own weapons. He delivered a series of powerful blows to the Fouke monster's head and torso, each punch landing with a sickening thud. The fouke monster howled in pain, but it refused to back down, its red eyes burning with fury. As the battle raged on, the swamp itself seemed to come alive. The water around them began to churn, and the trees groaned as if protesting the violence that was unfolding in their midst. The air grew thick with the smell of blood and decay, and the ground beneath their feet became increasingly unstable. Bigfoot could feel the swamp's pull, the sticky mud threatening to drag him down with every step he took. He knew that he needed to end the fight quickly before the swamp claimed them both. With a burst of strength, he managed to throw the fouke monster off balance, sending it crashing into the water. The fouke monster thrashed in the murky depths, its roars turning to guttural snarls as it struggled to free itself from the swamp's grasp. Bigfoot saw his opportunity and pounced, his massive hands wrapping around the fouke monster's throat as he attempted to subdue it once and for all. But the fouke monster was far from defeated. With a surge of power, it broke free from Bigfoot's grip and lashed out with its claws, catching Bigfoot across the face. The force of the blow sent Bigfoot reeling, his vision swimming as he fought to stay on his feet. The fouke monster, sensing victory, lunged at Bigfoot with renewed ferocity. But Bigfoot, despite his injuries, was not ready to give up. He ducked under the fouke monster's attack and delivered a powerful uppercut to its jaw, the impact sending the fouke monster sprawling back into the water. For a moment, both creatures lay still, their breaths coming in ragged gasps as they tried to regain their strength. The swamp was silent, the only sound the distant croak of a bullfrog and the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. But the battle was far from over. Bigfoot and the fouke monster rose to their feet, their eyes locked in a fierce glare. They were both battered and bloodied, their once mighty forms now covered in wounds and mud. But neither was willing to back down. They were predators, warriors, and this was a fight to the death. The fouke monster made the first move, charging at Bigfoot with a speed that belied its injuries. Bigfoot braced himself, his muscles tensing as he prepared to meet the attack. But at the last moment, he sidestepped, causing the fouke monster to crash into a tree with a bone-rattling impact. The tree splintered under the force, but the fouke monster quickly recovered, turning to face Bigfoot with a snarl. But Bigfoot was ready. Before the fouke monster could react, Bigfoot charged, his shoulder slamming into the creature's chest and sending it flying backward into the water. The fouke monster landed with a splash, its form quickly disappearing beneath the surface. Bigfoot stood on the edge of the water, his chest heaving as he watched for any sign of movement. He knew better than to assume the fight was over. The fouke monster was cunning and dangerous, and it could strike at any moment. Minutes passed, and the swamp remained eerily quiet. The water was still, the surface unbroken by any sign of life. Bigfoot's eyes scanned the area, his senses on high alert. He knew the fouke monster was out there, lurking just below the surface, waiting for the right moment to strike. Suddenly, the water erupted, and the fouke monster burst from the depths, its claws slashing through the air as it lunged at Bigfoot. But this time, Bigfoot was ready. He caught the fouke monster's arm in midair and twisted, using the creature's own momentum to throw it back into the water. The fouke monster howled in pain, its body thrashing as it struggled to break free from Bigfoot's grip. But Bigfoot was relentless. He tightened his hold, his massive hands crushing the fouke monster's arm as he dragged it further into the swamp. The fouke monster fought back with everything it had, its claws raking across Bigfoot's chest and arms. But Bigfoot's determination was unyielding. He had come too far, endured too much, to be defeated now. With a final, powerful heave, Bigfoot forced the fouke monster beneath the surface of the water. The swamp seemed to close in around them, the thick, murky depths swallowing both creatures as they continued their struggle beneath the surface. Bubbles rose to the top, popping in the stillness of the night, but there was no sign of either combatant. Bigfoot held the fouke monster down with all his remaining strength, the swamp's cold water seeping into his fur and filling his lungs with the acrid taste of decay. He could feel the fouke monster's struggles weakening, its desperate thrashing slowing as the swamp began to claim it. But Bigfoot, too, was running out of air, his vision darkening as his body cried out for oxygen. Just when he thought he might lose consciousness, Bigfoot summoned the last reserves of his strength and pushed off from the swamp's muddy bottom, propelling himself and the fouke monster upward. They burst through the surface in an explosion of water and mud, gasping for air. The Fouke monster's roars of fury were weaker now, its once fiery eyes dimming as its life force ebbed. Bigfoot knew the end was near. He wrapped his massive hands around the Fouke monster's neck, squeezing with a force that could bend steel. The Fouke monster's claws raked weakly at Bigfoot's arms, but the fight had gone out of the creature. With one final, strangled breath, the Fouke monster went limp, its body sinking lifelessly into the swamp. Bigfoot released his grip, watching as the Fouke monster's form disappeared into the murky depths. The swamp water stilled, and a profound silence fell over the area. Bigfoot stood there for a moment, his body trembling from exhaustion and pain, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He had won, but the victory felt hollow in the cold, desolate swamp. Bigfoot knew he couldn't stay in the swamp any longer. The wounds from his battle were deep, and he could feel the poison of the swamp seeping into them. He needed to find a way out, to return to the forests of the Pacific Northwest, where he could heal and recover. But first, he needed to escape this cursed place. The swamp, though treacherous, had an ancient knowledge of its own. The trees, the water, and even the ground seemed to guide him, as if the very land respected his victory over the Fouke monster. Bigfoot trudged through the swamp, following an unseen path that led him away from the battleground and toward higher ground. As dawn began to break, the first rays of sunlight filtered through the trees, casting a golden light over the swamp. Bigfoot emerged from the swampy depths onto firmer ground, his fur matted with mud and blood, but his spirit unbroken. He paused for a moment, looking back at the swamp that had nearly claimed his life. The place was silent, peaceful even, as if it had returned to its natural state now that the Fouke monster was no more. Bigfoot turned away and began his journey north. The pull that had driven him to the swamp had vanished, leaving only a sense of urgency to return home. He traveled through the dense forests of Arkansas, crossing rivers and scaling hills, moving with a purpose that only a creature of his stature could maintain. Days passed, and as Bigfoot moved further north, the landscape began to change. The humid swamps and lowlands gave way to the rolling hills of the Ozarks, and eventually to the towering peaks of the Rockies. The air grew cooler, the forests denser, and the familiar scent of pine filled his nostrils. He was getting closer to home. By the time Bigfoot reached the mountains, his wounds had begun to heal, though the scars would remain as a reminder of the battle he had fought. He climbed higher into the mountains, feeling the strength return to his limbs as the cool mountain air filled his lungs. He knew every inch of this land, every tree, every rock, and he was finally back where he belonged. As he reached the summit of a familiar peak, Bigfoot paused to take in the view. The vast expanse of forest stretched out before him, the mountains rising majestically into the sky. He had wandered far, fought hard, and survived a battle that few creatures could have withstood. But now, he was home. The pull that had once guided him was gone, leaving only a deep sense of peace. Bigfoot knew that his place was here, in the mountains and forests where he had lived for centuries. The swamps of Fouke and the legendary Fouke monster were now part of his past, a story that would become part of the legends whispered by those who dared to speak of such things. As the sun set behind the mountains, casting the forest in a warm, golden light, Bigfoot let out a deep, resonant call. It echoed through the trees, carried by the wind, a signal to the other creatures of the forest that the king had returned. And with that, Bigfoot disappeared into the shadows of the forest, leaving the swamps and the battle behind, but carrying the memories of the Fouke monster with him forever.